Hi, this is Doboki, and today I'm going to be doing Top 5 Wednesday. Apologies in advance. I think my neighbor downstairs is practicing the trombone or something. I'm really bad at differentiating brass instruments, so there might be a nice soundtrack to the back of this. I'm not really sure how audible it is. But anyway, so I will link to the information for Top 5 Wednesday below to the Goodreads group if you would like more information or would like to see any of the prompts that are kind of coming up if you'd like to participate. And the prompt for this week is Top 5 Favorite Villains. So let's just start with a series that I always bring up except somehow have not brought up at all this November. This is Kushiel's Dart, which is a really great fantasy series that that's maybe one of my favorite series of all time. Kushiel's Dart is a fantasy series that takes place primarily in a pseudo-Europe, though it does venture off into other worlds. It follows the main character Phaedra, who's a courtesan who basically is involved in a lot of political intrigue that are related to some gifts of her own, as well as some skills that she learns at the hand of her kind of master growing up. And I have talked a lot about why I love the series in terms of the protagonist, Phaedra. I have not talked about the villain at all, which is a shame because she's actually another really great part of the story and she's a big part of why I love the series so much. I am talking about Melisande, who is basically kind of Phaedra's she's basically her counterpoint throughout the whole series. There's a really great dynamic between them because there's a world that you can imagine them being really good friends, being lovers, being just really, if those two were on the same side, they would totally take over the world together. But kind of just by chance in some ways, by the way that Phaedra ends up in her current position, the lord who looks after her, she's basically put on the opposite side of Melisande, and yeah, that sort of shapes the entirety of their enmity. So even though there's a lot of admiration between the two, there's a lot of attraction between the two, there's also a great deal of antagonism, and they are constantly fighting against each other, and they're really great enemies because they really both are intelligent, capable women. And if you like the kind of Lady Macbeth character who is super power hungry, kind of almost for the sake of it, and who is really almost unapologetic about it, then Melisande is your character. She just wants to be powerful and she's willing to kind of do anything that she has to get there. So she's just awesome to read. Number 2 is kind of something similar in some ways. This is The Darkling from the Grisha Trilogy, and there are a lot of parts of the Grisha Trilogy that remind me of Kushiel's Dart. Before I get into that, the Grisha Trilogy is a YA series by Leigh Bardugo that is about it's kind of set in this kind of pseudo-Russia where there are witches, and the main character Alina is set up against this villain, the Darkling, and they are both kind of like Melisande and Phaedra. They're kind of this two sides of the same coin, and I think that's a big part of the draw between the two of them, but it's also, again, part of a great source of tension between them as well. And the Darkling does a lot of things that are abhorrent, which make him kind of ultimately unsympathetic in a lot of ways, but I think he's a really compelling character to read because of the factors that kind of make that make Alina, the main character, sympathetic towards him in a way that probably none of the other characters in the book, and maybe even we as readers, entirely understand. Number 3, this is the ultimate villain, maybe. This is Satan in Milton's Paradise Lost. So I read Paradise Lost in high school. I think I enjoyed it, but I didn't completely really understand it. I mean, I think what I remember is coming out of it thinking Satan makes the most sense, which I think is the viewpoint that a lot of people have when they read Paradise Lost. I actually ended up taking an epics class in college, and that really shaped my understanding of the poem. I'm not going to say that I'm an expert on Paradise Lost, but what this poem really made me appreciate is that thinking Satan is right is the whole point of the poem. It would be very hard not to respond with the feeling of the one person in this poem who makes the most sense is Satan. The only character who seems to be following any logical line of thought is the devil. Why is this even a question? Of course Adam and Eve did the right thing by falling. All of this makes sense. One of the things that the professor was arguing in our class is that that's the whole point. Milton is basically writing this poem as with the knowledge that we as fallen people are too distant maybe from the mindset of someone who is truly has faith, to actually like to be able to contradict in our own heads what the devil is arguing. And I am not Christian. I have no stake in the moral game of whether or not Adam and Eve should have been in the apple, but I think that reading of it really kind of helped to shape my view of the poem, to really understand Satan and his motivations and his actions and how they come off in the poem and how they come off necessarily to us as readers. I just found that really interesting, and it really gave me appreciation for how the devil is portrayed as a villain in the story, despite coming off as much more sympathetic than you would actually originally expect. Number 4 is Amy from Gone Girl, and I mean really everyone in Gone Girl is probably a villain. Everyone in this book is terrible, and this is another one like Paradise Lost where subsequent conversations have actually done a lot more to frame my understanding of the villain. This time when I read Gone Girl, I think like a lot of people, I was just trying to parse what was happening, and so I was just like, what the fuck is wrong with this girl? Like, I get that your husband cheated on you and you have some like monologues that are like super amazing, like the cool girl thing that everyone like quotes is totally relatable. I get it, like I get that frustration, but like dude, like what the fuck? Get your shit together. And then I had some conversations with people online where we were kind of chatting about the way that Gillian Flynn portrays women in her books, and one of the things that was pointed out to me about Amy is that she's really the embodiment of like every single negative stereotype about women, to the point where there's like nothing positive. She's just like a vacuum of like, she's a vacuum if that vacuum was made up entirely of like negative things about women that are said, right? Like, or things that are assumed about women if they don't meet some kind of baseline for decent behavior. Like, she's cold, she's manipulating people, like she's trying to fake pregnancies, she's like faking being raped, she's faking her own victimization. Like, she's just entirely deceitful. Basically the embodiment of what it would look like for a woman to be every man's worst nightmare. And once I kind of got that in my head, it totally reshaped my reading of her and really kind of made her amazing to me. Not in a way where I would ever want to like resemble her, where if I knew her in real life I would even like her, but I don't think that's the point. I don't think she's supposed to be representative of like real women. She's almost such a caricature of like terrible women and like of what people consider to be terrible women in today's society, that she's fascinating. That dichotomy between like her, the perception of her as amazing Amy and this victim, and the fact that she's like horrible and manipulative, like it's just such a great combination that I am obsessed. I really, it totally made me appreciate the portrayal of her in the books. It made me appreciate the portrayal of her in the movie a lot more. I love it. I just think it's really interesting to think about. Again, would never like her if she were a real person, but I don't think that's the point. On a semi-related character note, I guess, this brings me to my 5th one, and this is Irene Adler from Sherlock Holmes. And my favorite thing about Irene Adler as a villain is that she's not actually a villain. She's just Sherlock Holmes is better, and that makes her villainous in a lot of adaptations of her. So I actually don't think Sherlock Holmes thinks of her as a villain. I don't even think Sir Arthur Conan Doyle thinks of her as a villain. I just think that her position as the one person who has bested Sherlock Holmes and who also happens to be a woman has made her instantly cast as the villain for downstream adaptations of the books. So things like the BBC Sherlock or the Robert Downey Jr. version of her, they both set her as this like weird like criminal, even though she's not really a criminal. She's actually just a woman who wants her freedom. Like, she just wants to go off and get married to a guy and kind of get rid of the last dude that she was involved with. And that last dude is so like upset about her being over him that he's the one who's actually being the gross person in all this. Like, he's kind of the villain in the story. These adaptations just like don't seem to know what to do with that, and so they instantly cast her as the villain who was ultimately brought down by her feelings for Sherlock Holmes. Elementary is kind of a different story. I kind of find the Elementary like Moriarty, Irene Adler thing fascinating, but that's sort of a different like story altogether. These adaptations that are a little bit like self-conscious about the fact that a man has been bested by a female character. Irene Adler is how I judge all adaptations of Sherlock Holmes by, because if you can't handle your Sherlock Holmes as being beat by a woman, then your Sherlock Holmes is not really Sherlock Holmes in my opinions. I think Wishbone handles it the best. They have like maybe the best Irene Adler adaptation where they're like pretty strictly following the books. Here's to the villain who's not really a villain. Those are my top 5 villains slash my cop-out villain, not really villain. Tell me what you think, and yeah, bye.